One of the realities of today's world is cybersecurity. Now, we felt it individually. I mean, I've been hacked with my email right to global scale of these kinds of things. Ian Paterson is here with me from Plurilock. He's the head of Plurilock, cybersecurity company. But Ian, let me just start with this. You started, in Canada, but your clientele now reaches around the globe, which is just a reflection of how big a subject this is.
Well, Mike, it's always great to chat. And so we certainly have customers who have operations in places of the world, places like Israel, places like Asia, places like China. And with world events being what they are, a lot of times something that you think might not affect you because it's in a country far away actually does. And so we're helping our clients with ultimately with their cybersecurity needs. But it's interesting how conflict in the Middle East or rising tensions with China or war in the Ukraine can have real impacts to North American based companies.
Well, and individuals too. I mean, haven't we all got a ransomware attack from somebody in the Ukraine in the last 5 years? I mean, I'm not trying to just point them out, but yeah, it's just huge. It's part of our lives. So let me ask you then, we hear about AI powered stuff and AI powered phishing and advanced ransomware. Is that also just another layer that you've had to deal with that maybe you didn't have to deal anywhere near as much, say 5 years ago?
Well, it's interesting, Mike. I mean, I can remember a year or two ago, you and I were talking about ChatGPT and what an
Yes.
interesting technology was, and this was going to be a huge change to the industry. Well, what we have seen is that the bad guys were one of the first to adopt ChatGPT, and so you might not have stopped to ask the question, but think about the last spam email you got. Think about the last phishing email you got. Chances are the English was pretty good. A few years ago, it was really easy to spot because the English was
Yeah.
terrible, the grammar was terrible, the punctuation was terrible. Well, guess what? The bad guys don't have a compliance department, meaning there's nobody stopping them from using these Gen AI tools to write better phishing emails, to write better spam emails. And so we're seeing a huge increase in these types of attacks because Gen AI is making it really easy. Now, of course, the good guys are also adopting AI technologies, Gen AI technologies. One of the most common requests that we hear from our customers is, "Hey, I need to upgrade my cybersecurity tools. Which AI cybersecurity tool should I use?" So, I mean, this is a common conversation. But this is just endemic that we're seeing more and more attacks by bad guys leveraging these emerging technologies.
I think I'm sort of smiling, thinking all this bad news is good news for Plurilock. I mean, so many different things to handle, and so many the needs continue to grow. Let me just throw another one at you, because I've seen one recently. What we're calling deep fakes. Which again helps in misinformation, helps in fraud. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, deepfakes is this idea of impersonating somebody using not just text, but also video and audio.
Hmm.
There have been a few prolific examples that have been talked about in the news around deepfake videos being surfaced to try and trick a finance department to wiring millions of dollars or potentially tens of millions of dollars at the bequest of, in theory, the CEO, but in fact, it turned out to be a deep fake of the CEO. Again, because these are new technologies, we're not accustomed to them yet. And so IT teams, finance teams, executives, businesses, and frankly, even consumers really need to be on the lookout for making sure that when they get a request, that it is in fact the right person. This is an authentication problem. Um, we're talking with a lot of our customers around certainly implementing technology, but also implementing processes. I mean, for customers, for consumers, I should say, one of the easiest things that you can do is if you get a request from somebody that you think you know, simply reply back, ask them a question. "Hey, what did we have for lunch last time we saw each other?" That type of contextual challenge or contextual test can very quickly separate what looks and potentially sounds like somebody you know to getting them off script. So these are newer attacks that unfortunately we just have to deal with now in this new age.
Well, how would you rate? I want to give two categories here. How would you rate government in handling the cybersecurity threats? I mean, this is ongoing. To me, I want to make sure there's a department that deals with this and is changing things almost every day because of new ways of scamming, of new ways of fraudulent behavior, whatever we'd call it, a cyber attack. How would you rate governments? I'm especially thinking about our government.
It's challenging. I think governments have a responsibility and authority to protect the nation, whichever nation you're
Mm.
talking about, but they don't necessarily have the authority to protect individual businesses. So in Canada, just as an example, there was actually a bill to try and change some of this, which unfortunately died because of the current political situation in Ottawa. So we're
Yeah.
left in a bit of a limbo here where the people who have the right skills and tools in government may not have the authority to protect a private business. Now, there's some nuance there, and in fact, this was part of the conversation that I had with the Director General of Cybercrime at the RCMP on our new podcast called Code and Country. But it was really talking about that separation of authorities between what a private company or a private citizen should and ought to do versus what the government can do. And unfortunately, Mike, we're still new enough in cybersecurity that this is not completely a solved problem in terms of who does what.
Well, how would you rate, corporations and businesses? And it might be a very small business because, of course, at an individual level, you can sure get hacked and attacked and all sorts of things. But are you finding a lot more sensitivity to the challenge here? A lot more businesses prioritizing handling this in advance before there's. I mean, every week we seem to hear about another big problem with security that way. Are you finding, again, we're making big progress that on the individual and corporate level?
It's a great question, Mike. I think pre-COVID, we saw a number of industries that did not prioritize cybersecurity. Certainly, financial services, the public sector, defense, they always prioritized cybersecurity because if you're a bank, it's pretty easy conceptually to think you have something that somebody wants to steal. If you're a manufacturing company, if you have a factory, you might have told yourself pre-COVID, I don't have any data that's worth stealing. Who cares? Who's going to attack me? I think now what businesses across the board, across all industries are recognizing is that the business itself can be held for ransom. I mean, this is really what ransomware is designed to do.
Hmm.
They take control of either data or systems or both. They prevent you from being able to function, and they expect to get paid to unlock it. So businesses across the board are taking this seriously now. In fact, one of the fastest growing segments for us is high tech manufacturing. So we published a number of press releases announcing significant sales wins with participants in this industry, large global 2000 size enterprises in the semiconductor space and the high tech manufacturing space, because they have factories that have to run. If those factories don't run, they lose money. Pretty straightforward a conversation. So how much do you want to invest to make sure your factories are able to run? This ultimately is a key driver for why our revenue is growing, our margins are growing, and there's actually a specific part of our business called critical services, where we're providing very high-end cybersecurity consulting work to global 2000 sized organizations. It is growing the fastest, and the reason that it's growing the fastest is that businesses and corporations, on the whole, are now waking up and saying we have to give an ounce of prevention because it's worth a pound of cure.
Well, I'm thinking, the other side that people are directly related to is any kind of financial stuff. I mean, I know I go over my credit card statements because I've had problems with them in the past. And I know the banks have really upped their game in that way. They have a fraud department and they flag different things, but it just seems like the attacks are more frequent, more insidious. And I guess my point is, Ian, I don't want people to wait till they've been a victim. I don't want companies to wait till they're a victim. I certainly don't want our country to wait till they're a victim. So, I mean, obviously, it's a great business for you guys at Plurilock. I mean, it just keeps growing as the attacks keep becoming more, huge variety and more insidious, et cetera. But yeah, I guess my big goal is that people don't wait to look at this. So let me just finish with asking you about individuals. What can we do to make sure we're not victims of financial fraud or email related fraud or anything else you see?
One of the most common campaigns that bad guys are using right now is gift card scams. It's very common for individuals to be targeted if they've recently joined a new company. You publish an update on LinkedIn, you celebrate, hooray, I've got a new job, I've started a new career, etc. The bad guys are watching that. They will find the cell phone number typically, or potentially the email address of that individual. They're new to an organization, they're a little bit unsure about things, and they'll get either an email, a text message, or a voice call saying, hey, it's the boss. I'm in a meeting. It's a very important meeting. I need you to run out. I need you to buy $1,000 of gift cards right now. It's super important. Don't worry, I'll pay you back. That employee wants to make a good impression because it's a new job. They want to impress. It's the boss. You got to go do it.
Yep.
So they run out, they get the gift cards, they send it off. And by the time they realize maybe I should check with somebody else, it's too late. The gift cards are gone. We see this time and time and time again. And because the dollar figure is actually pretty low, it's not always reported, number one. Number two, other than training, there's not great ways of identifying this. You have to go out of your way to say, here's what's going to happen. You're likely to get this as an executive, as you know, none of our executives, none of your managers are going to communicate with you in this way. They're not going to send you a message to your personal cell phone. You got to be aware. So awareness, Mike, that's the key here. You got to be aware of what attacks are taking place, so that when they happen to you, you can spot them and hopefully you can just brush them aside. There's additional things you can do, use different passwords, use password managers, back up your data, etc. But, you know, at the end of the day, Mike, it's really about awareness.
You know, it's funny. I just don't follow up on anything like that. And by the way, I've also taken the thing of phoning people and or emailing them and saying, I will never include an attachment without phoning you first, you know, and letting you know it's coming. I mean, it's just, as again, if you haven't had this problem, believe me, you never do want to have it. Yeah, I just think this is an unbelievable business opportunity, unbelievable industry right now as it explodes. And I'm glad Plurilock's doing their part on all sorts of levels of it. But man, it's got to be top of mind for people now. I mean, it's great news for you, as I said. And that's why, by the way, you're doing the new podcast, the Code and Country podcast, Code and Country podcast. Oh my goodness gracious! You don't have any shortage of topics to hit on.
Well, or guests. So Code and Country is a new podcast that we've launched. Find it on Spotify, iTunes. Codeandcountry.fm is the URL. But what we found was we have a phenomenal leadership team. We have a phenomenal ecosystem of experts around us, and we asked the question, well, how can we share some of that insight and wisdom with our broader customer base, shareholder base, etc. So Code and Country, we've launched a number of episodes already. So you can, I mentioned one earlier, but people like the former director of the National Security Agency, the former director of the National Intelligence, the current Director General for Cybercrime at the RCMP. And we just have a conversation around, what does cybersecurity mean? What does cybersecurity mean in the context of national security? We don't go too deep into the weeds. We try and keep things at an altitude that I think most people can comprehend. And the idea is to educate. We have even people who work in cybersecurity, but they may not be a consultant. They might be, you know, somebody who works in the finance department. It's a way of them understanding some of the nuances of how we've arrived at this point in the cybersecurity ecosystem, and what are some things that we can do.
Great stuff, Ian, as usual. I really appreciate you finding time. Our go-to guy when we talk about cybersecurity, Plurilock's Ian Paterson. Ian, thanks for taking the time.
Thanks, Mike.